Alright, so I wanted to do a video on a topic that can definitely be a topic of debate, and it is whether Bibles should have red letter for the quotes of Christ. Should the words of Christ be in red letter? On this video, I want to give a little bit of a defense for red letter Bibles, although I will admit there are some downsides. But I wanted to show you some examples here. I've got a ESV Classic Reference Bible, that's a red letter. Then we have a Schuyler Personal Size Quintel, that is red letter right here. We have a Thompson Chain Reference Bible in red letter, and Church Bible Publishers Turquoise in red letter. And as you can see from these four samples, not all red letter Bibles are equal. Not all red letter is the same. So I want to share some things that I think are good about red letter, even though I know this is triggering some of you. Just looking at these red letter Bibles, it's hard for you to do it. So please try to persevere through this video. Don't turn it off. One thing I want to point out is that when you're preaching, as you're going through the Bible and you're teaching, it is actually easier to spot the words of Christ when they're in red. That's a good thing. As a matter of fact, I heard a preacher talking about this recently, where they were just saying, as they're going through the Bible, it's easier if the more you have to differentiate as a preacher, the better when you're up in front of people. So here, you've got black text for most of the text, but then with the words of Christ, they really stand out. So that's good when you're preaching and teaching. Also with the KJV, you don't have quotation marks. So the red letter, and I suspect that might be one reason it got to be popular, is because with the King James Bibles, you didn't have quotation marks. So this makes it a little clearer where Jesus is talking. And that actually is really good with the format of the King James Version. And then one other thing that is good about red letter, even though I know not all of you like it, is that it does honor Christ. It's not saying that these words are more inspired, but Jesus is incarnate and has a special voice, God with us. And so the words of Christ being in red is symbolic, and I think in a way honors him in his words. And that's not a bad thing. Now, are there downsides to these red letters? Definitely. One problem, as many people point out, is inconsistency. So with red letter, you might have darker red in some places, and then it might be more noticeably light in other places. Now this is a Schuyler Bible, so you're getting really darkly printed red, and it is quite consistent. I'm not going to say it's perfectly consistent throughout the entire New Testament, but it is pretty good. But that's what you would expect in a high-end Bible. But some of the Bibles are less consistent. And then another problem, and this is probably the biggest problem, and you can see it just in looking at these Bibles, is the color differentiation, that not all red is the same. So this is dark red in the Schuyler, and that looks great. That's, I guess you could say, how red should be done. But then over here, turquoise, it's a little bit lighter, but it still looks really good. That's deep enough red that it still is nice on the eyes. And then over here, we start to see some more of a problem. This is the ESV Classic Reference, and it's a little bit washed out. And so in some lighting, that can be a problem. As you can even see on the camera here, I think, it's just not as crisp. And then the worst of these, which is not surprising probably to a lot of you, is the Thompson Chain. This red is really more of a pink. And I think it actually, in some ways, might be what gives red letter a bad name, is the Thompson Chain. No offense, Thompson Chain Bibles are awesome, but the red letter is, in my opinion, and probably many others, a weakness. So yeah, that is a problem, is the coloring with some of the red letters. And then finally, a reason that people have a problem with red letter is theology. They kind of feel like it's somehow making the red letters more important than the black letters. And that is certainly not what we're supposed to think when we see red letter. Again, the words of Jesus, they are special in the sense that they come from Christ, but all of God's word is inspired, and so they're not more inspired than any other parts of the Bible. But I can see why people would think that might be confusing when people are reading a Bible and they see these red letters. Overall, though, I would say that as a teacher and as someone who grew up with a lot of red letter Bibles, I generally like the red letter. I'm not saying that I have to have it. At the end of the day, I could go either way. But if it's done right, like in the Skylar PSQ here, I think it looks great. It's not showing up perfectly on camera, but as you can see, it's still really clear. It looks nice. I love it in the turquoise. But I will say, Thompson chain, not my favorite. There are certain pages where it's just actually hard to read in certain lighting because it's just not very deep, not very clear. And then a little bit of that problem here in the ESV as well. So those are my thoughts on red letter. I hope I've made a little bit of a case for it for those of you who despise it, so that at least you won't so heavily despise it. Maybe you'll be a little bit okay with it. And for those of you who like red letter, I hope that I've been a little bit of a cheerleader and support for the red letter cause. So those are my thoughts from a Frisch perspective on red letter Bibles. Thank you so much for watching.